I'm so sick of people shoving their cameras on others' faces everywhere you go these days. I fumed when I entered the house and went to the kitchen to put the grocery in the refrigerator. What happened? Natalie's calm voice reached my ears. I looked around and found her painting her nails on the couch. On a typical day, I would have just let her mind her business and give her a reply with nothing. But today, I was pissed. So I walked to the couch and sat across from her. You know how I hate being filmed, right? I was minding my business when this TikToker came out of nowhere and started shooting a reaction video. I told her about my bothersome trip to Walmart. Relax, it's nothing, she said, without even batting her eyes as she blew on her neatly painted blue nails. Her skills always amused me. Someone who cannot even do this with their right hand. Nothing, you say? I'm telling you, one of these days I will end up in jail for murdering someone for filming me without consent. My anger hadn't subsided yet. Every time I thought of that incident, I was filled with rage. Come on, you're overreacting. I wasn't even surprised at her words, since she also had mild symptoms of those TikTokers. She just hadn't evolved into them yet, who goes around disturbing people's lives for their 5 minutes of fame. And I think you people are not reacting enough on this nonsense and letting this get out of hand. Don't you find this absurd and disturbing? Or are you also planning on doing that? The bitterness in my voice was evident, which made her flinch. She got up without replying and went to her room. I don't blame her. I was rather rude to her. Natalie and I have been roommates for over 6 months, but we were still quite indifferent to one another. She would do her thing without disturbing me, and I would do the same. But there were times when we exchanged our opinions on some matters. It would be a brief 5 minutes of discussion. Our personalities were entirely different. She was the kind of popular girl you see in high school, and I, on the other hand, was your introverted nerd who despised attention. When I first saw her, I knew we wouldn't get along, so I set a few rules for us in advance. I didn't expect her to follow, but she did. One night, while sleeping in my room, I heard a faint murmuring voice coming, making me wake up. I rubbed my eyes and grabbed my phone to check the time, and it was 2:07 a.m. Did she finally lose her mind over TikTok? For goodness sake, Natalie, it's wee hours. Who are you people? My face turned pale when I saw 3 masked men instead of her. And one of them had a camera in his hand and was shooting while the other 2 were putting TV and other valuables from the living room into their bags. What's going on, Sophie? Natalie came out of her room rubbing her eyes, but froze as her eyes landed on the intruders. I was left dumbfounded when I saw her rushing back into her room and locking it. Did she leave me to face these psychos all by myself? One thing was sure, these people were TikTokers, but I was shocked to see them filming their crime. I was scared they would harm me, but thankfully they never did, and continued to rob me. Excuse me, you cannot take that. That's my late mom's gift to me. As I rushed to snatch the statue from them, one grabbed me and prevented me from doing so. I continued screaming and begging them to leave our things alone because we couldn't afford to repurchase them. But they continued laughing, filming, and taking things. That was when a few officers rushed inside, and before I knew it, they were arrested. Since the front door was already unlocked, they could have done so. But how? Oh, Natalie. She came out of her room when they removed the masks from their faces, and I was utterly speechless to see they were just teenagers. Their ages must have been around 16 to 18. I wanted to give these 3 an earful, but I couldn't do that since there wasn't an ounce of remorse on their faces, almost as if they couldn't even see the seriousness of their actions. What if I was some angry man who decided to defend their house and kill one of them? Would they understand then? But for some reason, I couldn't blame these children. Some parents these days neglect their children after giving birth, leading them to be influenced by such useless acts. After the officers took them, I looked at Natalie feeling guilty. I'm sorry for judging you too soon. I didn't know you went in to call 911. As I stared at the ground, these words came out of my mouth. Don't mind it. I would have felt the same if I were in your shoes. She turned to her room as she said that. I stared at her back, thinking she wasn't that bad. By the way, those kids were filming it. I followed her to her room door, not only because my room was opposite it, but because I wanted to talk to her after this frightening incident. It's because of this weird trend that's been going on these days. She turned around and showed me on her phone where people were going all out committing crimes and filming it. Were they seriously going this far and destroying their futures for their 5 minutes of fame? I don't think I would be able to sleep anymore. Do you want to grab a drink with me? I wasn't sure if she would accept it, but I asked her anyway. Sure. She turned to the kitchen after saying that and took out 2 bottles of beer. So, why do you use TikTok again? The 2 of us talked till dawn, when I learned she wasn't fond of trends either and just used the app for educational purposes, sharing facts about biology and all. The more we talked, the more I found myself relating to her. It's funny how we form our opinions solely on people's appearances and how they carry themselves. I'm sure your opinion might be different, but I learned 2 things that night. How judgmental I was all this time, something I hope never to do again. And TikTok was destroying teenagers' lives and putting others in danger with these strange challenges and trends.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
In June of 2020, a TikTok user with the username UgHenry decided that he and a few friends would use TikTok to record themselves going on an adventure. It was an adventure that was based around the popular adventure app Randonautica. Upon opening the app, Randonautica asks you to share your location. Then it will ask you to choose which type of point you would like to generate, be it a void or an anomaly, before fetching coordinates using a random number generator. The user can then open that location in Google Maps to begin their journey. Randonautica adventures were something of a meme at the time, and many other TikTok users were uploading videos of themselves using the app. Given that some journeys had ended with some rather creepy occurrences, UgHenry decided to give Randonautica a try himself. And so Henry and his 2 friends spent their afternoon following a series of apparently randomly generated coordinates around their hometown of Seattle. The keyword they entered into Randonautica app was travel, so when the app pointed them in the direction of Alley Avenue Southwest, a street right next to the shoreline of Elliott Bay, they figured the ocean was their final clue. But when they arrived at their destination, they found something disturbingly relevant lying on the rocks near the water. It was a suitcase, and in particular, a travel case. Like many people at the time, Henry and his friends were almost convinced that there was a kind of magic at work with Randonautica. Scores of other randonauts found the endings to their journey to be far too fitting or poetic to be purely random or coincidental, and now Henry was one of them, and he had a potential viral video to go with it. But Henry's video is about to go viral for considerably more sinister reasons, because as they approached the travel case, they began to smell something rotten in the air, and the situation was about to take a decidedly dark turn. At first, Henry and his friends simply laughed off the smell, thinking it either came from one of them or from something washed up further down the beach. They continued to film the bag, with one of them prodding it a little before telling the others how heavy it seemed. One of the people in the video jokes about the contents being rotten groceries, hence the smell. But after another makes a quip about the contents being cash, it's only a matter of time before one of the friends decides to open the case. But as soon as they do, the god-awful stench in the air becomes even more intense, so much so that the friends begin retching and gagging off camera. It was only when they saw the stuffed trash bags inside the case that they began to fear the worst. And after calling 911 and having some cops check out the travel case, the worst fears were confirmed. Inside the travel case were 2 dead bodies, one male, one female. Ugg Henry wrote that he broke down the moment he got home after finding the suitcase. He added that his laughter in the video was his way of trying to get through the situation and said he has since then been unable to sleep. The TikTok video of Henry's morbid discovery earned him more than 15 million views and fueled the speculation that the Randonautica app was somehow cursed. But outside of the paranormal speculation, a very real investigation was launched into how these 2 dead bodies came to end stuffed inside of a travel case. According to a post-mortem examination performed by the King County Medical Office, based on the state of decomposition, 35-year-old Jessica Lewis and her 27-year-old boyfriend Austin Wenner were shot and killed on or around June 9th, just days before they were found. Police then set about questioning those closest to the couple, one of which was their landlord, 62-year-old Michael Dudley, who rented the top floor of his large home to them. On the night of their killing, neighbors reportedly heard a man yelling, "Please don't do this, just let me leave," before gunshots were fired. During his questioning, many of Michael's answers seemed inconsistent or cagey, and was overly nervous during the conversation when he apparently had no reason to be so. It was just enough for the police to focus their suspicions on him, and they quickly obtained a search warrant for the house that both Michael and the murdered couple called home. During their search, law enforcement discovered bullet holes in one of the walls, blood in the couple's bedroom, and a fresh coat of paint on a random part of a banister. When the police confronted him regarding their findings, Michael claimed that he'd heard Jessica had somehow managed to cut herself and denied the bullet holes even being there. He was promptly arrested, then taken to a holding cell to await further questioning. There has been plenty of media speculation as to why exactly Michael Dudley would shoot the young couple, but one source has suggested that the straw that broke the camel's back was their inability to make rent payments. Outside of that, there are plenty of skeletons in Michael's closet that suggest deep-rooted violent proclivities. One media outlet discovered a history of interfamilial relations and carnal abuse when they came across an assault restraining order filed against Michael by his own daughter in June of 2018. Some court documents are said to have read, "My father indecently assaulted me for 9 years, from age 10 until age 18, forcing me to share a bed with him from age 10 while he'd play adult movies on the TV. I don't feel safe in my home or leaving my home to work." His daughter also added that Michael had a very disturbing habit, a ritual in which he would take out his pistol and threaten to use it on her. Gina Yeshka, Jessica's aunt, said she was close with her niece before she died. Gina told the media that her knowledge of Michael Dudley more or less lines up with the allegations made by his daughter. Sometimes he would break their car so they couldn't leave, she said. He put trackers on people's cars. Anytime he ever got in a dispute with anybody, he would tell them to leave but try to lock them in the house. But most horrifying of all, according to Gina, Michael had another disturbing tendency: cruelty towards animals that couldn't protect themselves. He killed the dog in front of them and left the carcass outside for 3 days to scare them, Gina continued. They had nowhere to go. That's why they stayed there. He beat this dog to death with a hammer because it got one of his chickens. He just left it out there for the other dogs to look at and sniff. He's a freaking psycho. She also said the loss of her niece, a mother of 4, and her niece's longtime boyfriend has all but destroyed their families. I don't want them to be remembered in any violent way. I want them to be remembered for their humanity and their kindness. I want to believe they didn't suffer. Michael himself has been taken into custody, but evidence suggests that someone might well go unpunished for their involvement in Jess and Austin's murders. During the post-mortem of their dismembered bodies, the coroner observed that the slices and hacks around their joints were disorganized and appeared to be done in different manners with various devices. The police spokesperson also mentioned that after dismembering his victims, Michael had apparently set about dispersing their bodies in multiple bags throughout various bodies of water, and given the time frame and placement of the bags, it is unlikely that Michael did this alone. This means that there could well be someone just walking around Seattle, a free individual, who helped cut up and dispose of two innocent young people, a loving couple who could possibly have been executed over nothing more than a late rent payment. After his arrest, Michael's bail was set to $3 million, with the judge citing his willingness to commit horrific acts of violence. The process of dismemberment would have taken a lot of time and effort, and his willingness to take these extreme steps demonstrates the threat he poses to the community, charging documents read. It appears that Michael is indeed guilty of Jess and Austin's murder, and it's more than likely that he'll go to prison for a very long time. But it was TikTok that made them famous. Millions of people all over the world learned of such barbaric acts because of a simple video messaging app. Big tech companies like Facebook or Twitter might like to think that every so often social media brings a little light into our lives, yet it seems that every so often apps like TikTok can bring a little darkness into our lives too.
The man born as Frank Rostam Rashawn would eventually go by Andre Rand during his adult life, but the name on his driver's license has become somewhat irrelevant as his terrifying exploits would be attached to a deceptively playful nickname born in New York City on March 11th of 1944. Rand would spend most of his life around Staten Island, going on to be one of the most infamous criminals that the Northeast has ever known. And although Rand definitely wasn't the most prolific serial killer, it's more the nature of his crimes that made him so universally reviled. You see, Andre Rand's prey of choice was children. Thankfully, Andre Rand is currently serving several consecutive 25 years of life sentences, but the convicted kidnapper and suspected child serial killer managed to wreak enough havoc and inflict enough pain in his time that his capture and imprisonment provided very little solace, yet bizarrely, the man's morbidly fascinating tale began as a real-world campfire story, and days gone by, young people all over the borough of Staten Island would scare the living daylights out of each other with the description of the monstrous figure known only as Cropsey, supposedly a sort of boogeyman figure with the razor-sharp steel hook for a hand. Cropsey would apparently drag innocent children from their home in the middle of the night before carrying them to an abandoned hospital, where depending on who was telling the story, you would be tortured, killed, eaten, or any combination of the three. Although creepy campfire and urban legends are a standard, a thrilling part of most everyone's early childhood for the children of Staten Island, these ominous little tales soon became disquietly real. The line between fact and fiction began to blur as local children began to vanish in real life. But when their cold, dead bodies were found, it made it clear that this was no mere campfire tale. Could it be that Cropsey was real during the 1960s? Andre Rand was employed as a custodian. The Willowbrook State School Fund by state government, the Willowbrook was a charitable center that provided aid for children with disabilities on the surface. All of the Willowbrook's practices were good and proper, but upon closer inspection, state officials began to unravel a web of unquestionable conditions and unethical medical practices. On the advice of the inspectors, the Willowbrook was immediately closed, and Andre Rand was forced to find alternative employment. Rand at a clean slate, he could have pursued just about to any manner of unskilled labor, but instead, they chose to pursue an even more horrifying career between the dates of the Willowbrook's closing in the early 1970s. Several young girls went missing in the area surrounding the abandoned hospital. The first was a 5-year-old Alicia Piera on July 10, 1972. The happy-go-lucky toddler seemed to simply vanish into thin air while playing in the street. Just outside her house, a street located just a few miles southeast of the old Willbrook Hospital. For a while, the whereabouts of the small child remained a complete mystery if there was something else the local townsfolk were unaware of, that Andre Rand once went by Frank Rashawn. Frank Rashawn had once served 10 months in prison, but the abduction of several small children, the fact he did 10 months stems from the fact that his defense attorney managed to essentially haggle a judge down to a conviction of false imprisonment, a crime with a considerably lower penalty than kidnap or abduction, but the conviction was enough to smear Frank's name for good. And so, we came up with the rather simple and cunning solution. They changed it, and after moving to Staten Island, became Andre Rand. Yet, as much as Rand could hide his identity from the townsfolk, he couldn't hide his identity from police officers who were well aware of his legal change of name. So when little Alicia Piero went missing on the warm July evening, the police considered Rand to be the prime suspect, despite their conviction's evidence was flimsy and not nearly enough to gain a solid conviction in a court of law. And so, as the cops chose to hold their horses, the bodies began to pile up. On July 15, 1981, 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes went missing. Her parents filed a missing persons report, while several witnesses claimed to have seen the girl with Iran shortly before her disappearance. Once again, no actual evidence led to no actual arrests 2 years later. Rand once again becoming the prime suspect when 11-year-old Tice Johnson disappeared. Then, in 1984, 21-year-old Hank Jaffario vanished. These unnerving accidents left the nearby townsfolk racked with terror, a terror that was exacerbated by the fact that not a single person was apprehended with all of the laws for a potential motive. It was a whopping 3 years before local law enforcement finally caught a break in their investigation. 12-year-old girl Jennifer Swagger was reported missing on July 9th of 1987. The search for her or her body lasted 35 days and ended in the traumatic unearthing of her body in a wooded area on Staten Island, according to the New York Times. Swagger was found dead in a shallow grave on the former property of the Willboro State School. By the time Jenny Swagger's body was found, police decided they had to act, and Andre Rand was arrested and charged as a suspect in the murder once again prosecutors felt afoul of. Court procedure and found they were unable to convict Rand on the murder charge, with there only being enough evidence to irrefutably convict him of kidnapping. This was 1988. Prosecutors had Rand exactly where they wanted him, in a federal penitentiary, where he'd stew while they worked on convicting him of the other children murders, although there wasn't enough evidence at the time Rand was found guilty of Holly and Hughes kidnapping in 2004. Over 2 decades after she originally went missing, and since there is no statute of limitations for New York for first-degree kidnapping, prosecutors ensured that Rand wouldn't escape justice for his historic depravities. It was given an additional 25 years of life sentence on top of the one he had already served. All in all, the Staten Island boogeyman sits behind bars to this day for the kidnapping of Holly and Hughes and Jennifer Swagger, and won't be eligible for parole until 2037. Provided he lives that long, it'll be 93 years old, and the day he walks free, Andre Rand's deserving life and legacy were dissected in the 2019 documentary film Crosby. The film premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival that year and won the Grand Jury Prize for its enthralling narrative and slick production quality. And I'm watching it, it's easy to see why the essential premise of the movie was to explore whether or the Staten Island urban legend of Crops he was actually tied into Iran's mysterious career. Whether one had fed into the other until the fact and fiction had become indistinguishable. Yet, as the movie came to show for some of the people who experienced those years on Staten Island as well as those involved in searching for the missing kids, the term boogeyman didn't even broach Rand's despicable psychopathy. Donna Conto, president of the charity Friends of the Jennifer for Missing Children, calls Rand the Hannibal Lecter of Staten Island. Donna and her fellow volunteers have the unenviable task of searching Oliver, Willowbrook's 385-acre twice a year in search of any undiscovered remains. He terrified a whole community, and he still haunts us, Donna was quoted, as saying for some kids, it's like if Corpsey was real. What else are they telling us and I don't know sometimes? I feel a little of that too at the end. Andre Rand was arrested, imprisoned, and may never see the light of day again. But nevertheless, his impact on the Staten Island community is immeasurable, and Cropsey has left behind massive traumatical trauma that may well last for generations. Some of those children are still missing. The remains are so out there somewhere, and as the years go by and their bones are pulled one by one from the cold earth, entombing them, the memories of Rand's reign of terror will come back flooding over and over again. And maybe that's what makes the Cropsey story so well and truly terrifying. The core lesson in the story, the frightful foundation of its message, is that the boogeyman is real and he wears the faces of men.